Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. I'm Chris DeSantis, and I am joined, as I usually am, by the powerful, the resplendent Joel Rawlings. Joel, how are
I'm
you?
glad you got the thesaurus of the day calendar up and running. That's awesome. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Look, you say thesaurus, but I know that you always describe yourself as resplendent. So
I've already picked out my tombstone because I figure maybe I got like 5-6 more years anyway. Resplendent is going to be the first one I'm going to have on there. That's a good one, yeah.
he resplended a lot, Joel Rawlings.
The once resplendent lies here, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Before we get into the podcast today, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Pro Swim Workouts. If you're like me, then you've had a lot of moments in your life where you sat down to write a swim training session and suffered from a bit of writer's block. Maybe you're not satisfied with what you've been doing. You're looking for inspiration to solve a problem in a workout that you haven't yet. Whatever's going on, Pro Swim Workouts can be a great resource for that. They have sessions organized by type of team, developmental level, type of workout, equipment needed, and course. And so you can always find something that will help you with what you need. And more than anything, I always say this, I'm happy to have them as a sponsor because the guy behind the site, Nico Messer, who, by the way, greatly enjoyed last week's podcast vis-a-vis AI, as I thought he would. He's one of us. He's a coach. He's got a lot of curiosity. He made the site because he was looking for a way to get better. And right now, Swim Brief listeners can get a discount on Pro Swim Workouts membership if you use code CDSwimCoach. And if you do so, you support this podcast. So that makes me happy too. Makes Joel happy, even though I don't kick any of that back to him. I just
not a dime.
Make him do this for free. That's a joke, people. By the way, I did offer Joel some sponsorship money once, and he rejected me.
Huh?
Right, Joel?
Yeah.
Is that how you remember it?
Wow. Huh. Okay. Well, we'll finish that up. That'll be a different podcast. So, what's this podcast going to be about?
What are we going to talk about on this podcast? Okay, so people who have been listening, people who follow me on social media know that I have recently launched sign up for a course. This is the first of 5 courses I'm planning on offering in positive psychology in coaching. And, you know, I've realized since doing that, I've gotten really great response. But I've realized since doing that there are people that even those that follow me on social media, people that listen to this podcast, people that know me, like my friends, right? Who I just kind of assume like, hey, you know what this is all about, right? Are going, so what's that course all about? And so I want to talk a bit, but really what I want to talk about is along the lines of some of what we've been discussing writ large on this podcast. And it has to do with why I ended up making the course, because I actually think it's really necessary. You know, it goes way beyond any kind of business aim for me. There's a lot of other ways I could make money, but I talk to coaches every day, usually multiple coaches per day. And you know, I try to do more listening than talking. And what I'm listening for is, you know, what are the hard parts of what you're doing right now? Like what parts of this are doing something that, like, because I think a lot of coaches, you get into coaching because, you know, you have a love for the sport and you love coaching, right? Common saying is nobody gets in this to get rich. Your wife says there's no such thing as a big time swim coach, right? So people get into it because they love it, and because they love the meaning of what they're doing. And then there are things that chip away at you and wear you down. And I hear about those all the time. You hear about them. And I think I can help. I think I can help. But it struck me that a lot of what I was offering through Chris DeSantis coaching had a pretty high barrier of entry, right? It was really expensive. A lot in comparison to this, right? There were a lot of engagements that with me that were basically in the thousands of dollars. And again, swim coaches, not the richest population in the world. So it created like a big putt for a lot of these people to engage with some of the help. So I want to get though into some of the issues that I see, and we're going to have a conversation about it. I always love talking to you and the questions that come up. So one of the things that I see that's going on is I think that coaches are under immense increasing pressure to be, quote, positive, right? If you're a coach in a club environment, you probably have a board that is telling you, like we want a real positive leader for the young people, inside our organization. You have parents of kids every time that a kid's having a hard time going, like, I wish you would lift my kid up and, be more positive and have a more positive leadership style and have a more, have a better environment, all this stuff. If you're working within a college athletic department, the most cynical take on it, you've got an administrator who's like, listen, don't say anything stupid and, make trouble for me, right? Don't put your foot in it because you get frustrated one day on the job. And so like there's an overwhelming pressure on coaches, right? Yeah. To be positive. And I just want to like validate that is there, and that what I see in a lot of that messaging, and this is what I'm curious to have you respond to, is to me, it just seems like everybody is operating out of a place of fear. If I go back to that administrator example, you have these administrators, right, who are just sort of like, they're not really operating out of like an authentic, like, hey, I just want this to be the best place for, student athletes to participate. They're like, no, don't cause a problem for me. And you have parents who like are going like, my kid's upset and I don't know what to do. Let me like push it, fix it for me. Like I'm freaking out. Do something, be more positive, right? You have organizations, all the same thing. What do you see in terms of, because I'm curious, because I'm like in my own bunker when it comes to the term positivity, but what do you see out there in terms of the messaging that people have around this?
I think kind of a couple things. One is like when you're saying, I hear that, I definitely want more positive. I want this, or like I've gone on interviews sometimes, and it'd be interesting if you interview with, with a board setting, like so we'll throw something out there like, we need more positivity. He's like, okay, so the coach yelled at your kid. And like right away, I'm thinking like, what's your angle? Why are you on this board? Because I just, and again, I've already kind of got that cynicism going in that I assume if they ask a question, whatever it is basically they're like, we didn't think Coach X is providing this, therefore we want you to provide it. But it's like when you say positive, it's such a huge word. It's basically like, hey, coach, we want you to be more orange. Just might as well just say that, because it's like, what do you mean more positive? And then what I've seen is a lot of times, like I talk to people that I know that coach, when they're like, yeah, they told me I got to be more positive, or I have to be more this. I'm like, I am that. And right away we kind of take that defensive stance of, what do they mean? I create a positive, I'm smiling, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. And I think that's one of the roles of having a consultant come in is the idea like having someone that's, again, not emotionally attached to that situation, because your club is your baby. You've been there for longer than the parents have been. You've been there for 20 years. This parent's been around 2 years and you're saying more positive. So having someone that's detached from that situation, because obviously they have the emotional attachment of their child, and deservedly so. And you have the emotional attachment of your job. And you have someone come in that's going to say, this is just what I'm seeing, and this is what we could do to be more effective. Is like, I worked at Phillips 66 down in Bartlesville, Oklahoma for a while. And it was a pretty cool swim club because all these people were like really, really intelligent parents, like involved in like finding oil, like petrochemical, like all this chemistry kind of
Yeah,
things.
chemical engineers and stuff.
Brilliant
Yeah,
people. And this one guy was saying that they were clearing out his department. Like a lot of people were getting laid off. They had a new product manager, and he comes in. He's like, "Listen, just want to find out what everyone's doing here. Like, what's your next big creation that you're going to come up with?" And so basically, he's like, so you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In day one, you've already come in and you've established that you all might lose your shelter, your ability to feed yourselves, and water because you might get fired. And yet you want to know that pinnacle of creativity. What's your next big thing you're going to think about? And do it in about 10 seconds because you have to justify your salary. And then, it's like, again, that analogy going back to swimming is we want to be more positive. And now you're already kind of put on the spot of like, I'm not positive enough, that I'm not doing enough, that I don't care about your kids. And all of the stuff that comes in because positive is such an ambiguous word that you lump in with the chest. Like, I've done this. And you immediately are on the defensive and kind of like thinking, why are they coming at me? There's just one more thing. I'm exhausted. One more thing. And no one's like laying out clearly like, you know what? You didn't say hello to them this morning. And it could be something as simple as that. But nonetheless, it's like, and then when you get cornered on that, one day I didn't say hello. Are you kidding me?
for sure.
So I think that's the thing is just the ambiguous nature of the language of parents' boards and things like that. Not really having a quantitative approach to that. We're like, what exactly do you want? You want 5 hellos? I'll give you 5 hellos. Want me to smile more? How much more? I'll measure it out on my cheeks. What do you want from me?
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're getting at too is I think that a lot of coaches see some of this talk, and the reason why I think it's super toxic is that it's used to like disarm coaches. So what's getting interpreted on the other end, or what the coaches are experiencing is like, so now you want me to get your kid, to Olympic trials, but I have to do it with one arm tied behind my back while balancing like a dinner plate on my back foot. Like, you're going like,
you have to get into Olympic trials and you have to smile about it and be understanding that, well, they have band practice 3 nights a week. And so you're going to have to figure that out. So with a 3-day training plan to get them to trials and be positive about it.
Yeah. Please. Yeah. And just like, don't like, so I one of the benefits that I am bringing to this course is, of course I got an education. I'm proud of my education, right? I was the first sports coach to get that education, but I think way more valuable is the 14 years since then, because I was in the program, right, when I was coaching at Penn. And this is one of the first experiences I had while I was going through it. I remember I confronted a kid at practice and I said, like, the basic version of something that, and I actually made some social media posts about this very concept earlier this week, the basic version of a conversation coaches have to have all the time, which is you got a kid, they've set a goal, and what you're seeing from them in practice is not what you think is going to get them to where they want to go. And so I was having some version of that conversation, and the kid immediately, smart kid from Penn was like, "Hey, you're the positive psychology guy. Like, why are you being so negative with me?" By pointing that out. Mm-hmm. Right. And, so I've had 14 years to work on that problem, because I think most people run into that quite a bit, right? You get to a point where you as a coach, you are making people uncomfortable. And we all know that there is uncomfortability in improvement, right? If improvement were comfortable, we'd all be on a glide path to improvement all the time, right? Like, because it'd just be like, I'm just getting faster at swimming just by kind of doing my thing, right? Like, it doesn't work like that, right? So you have to get to points where people are going to be uncomfortable.
And so now taking that example, and again, saying that basically he has to be uncomfortable, putting it in like a club setting or something, how would you go about either, again, now all of a sudden you've got him going one direction now. He's saying that you're not being positive. Is it something like you should have addressed earlier which would probably would be a yes. You know, there's got to be maybe there's a step you can do earlier. But now let's just say you've gotten to that point. You're talking to one of your athletes. Listen, you've got great goals. You're not doing what you need to get to those goals. You know, is there a way that you can preface that in a way where you pull that plane out of the nose, you know, out of the mountain, or is there a way that now that he said you're not being positive, what would be some steps that you can go, you know, that basically I think what you're trying to do is you're telling them that you believe in them and you believe in those goals, but you also believe in the sport. You know, you respect the sport of swimming enough to say that, again, your training is what we're going to fall back on, not your desire.
Well, listen, like, first off, I think anytime you elicit what essentially is just a defensive response, like I made somebody uncomfortable, right? And they immediately went like, stop. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a version of like, hey, stop, back off, right? They're using some rationalization to get me to stop, which is you are the positive psychology guy, so you should not say anything that makes me upset. But really what they're, you know, like what the person on the other end is, you know, that swimmer was communicating to me was, what you're saying makes me feel upset and I want you to stop. Okay. So, you know, realize that, like, first off, you're going to do that. There's no perfect coach out there that can just go around and say all the perfect things at all the perfect times, and develop perfect relationships with everybody. But I would say, you know, in that specific situation, right, like you have an opportunity to pull back and look systemically, like why is the athlete on the other end feeling defensive, right? Like why, when you are pushing them to that level, do you get that response?
So not so much what the words are, but why have we already gotten to this point of this defensive wall? And kind of the idea that I've talked to some coaches about is we always think like I should have like a mountain of goodwill behind me, all the stuff I've done, but then one comment like that, all of a sudden we have that defensive wall. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. So it's no longer so much about that you don't believe in me, so much as like why are we already at this wall?
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that like that gets to the heart of why positive psychology, and one of the reasons why it's extremely hard to sell to people. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because you ask a question, you go, then what do I do now? And a lot of what I'm talking about is stuff that you are going to work on to make that scenario less likely in the future. Mm-hmm. But like, you know, our minds have a really hard time with that, right? We're, you know, creatures of survival. So it's like, we see problem, fix problem. Right. Like, tell me what to do to fix the problem. I'm focused on the problem that just came up right now, not right what actually like rationally we understand as coaches, which is like that you don't go like, oh, I messed up my flip turn at the meet. Well, like let's fix my flip turn right now. Mm-hmm. Right. That you actually have a process for fixing on the flip turn. It takes a long time. It involves looking at a big picture of things. So a lot of the positive psychology solutions are about, you know, creating the conditions for a better outcome down the line, and not necessarily about being reactive in the moment, right? So, you know, it's kind of like another way I've always described it is like it's mental prehab, right? Do you want to wait until your rotator cuff tears, mm-hmm. or do you want to have that joint, you know, secure and ready to push really hard? Like, again, most of us would say rationally we want the second, but then a lot of people just wait until their shoulder rips up and then get, you know, surgery and rehab and all that piece of it. So it's harder to get people to do the prehab than the rehab.
Okay. So what kind of things would you do to lay down the groundwork for, like, let's say whatever team you're starting up with, like you're at a senior team, you're at a college team, whatever it is, what's kind of like the way to kind of like lay groundwork so that communication doesn't get to the point where, you know, obviously it's not going to be a catch-all where you can just say this is the one thing you do, but so that you get to the point where, again, they will kind of remember the idea that, that this is a person that has my best interest at heart. This is someone that's trying to get me better. This is what his or her outcome is for me. How do we get that versus the end point you just said, where all of a sudden, hey, positive guy, how come you're not believing in me? So like, what are some of the groundwork that you would do initially to kind of lay this out? Where again, I would get to the point sometimes with the kids at the goal meeting, right away they kind of knew that, or they not knew, they felt like, because it's been done before, that this is something that's going to be thrown back in my face as soon as I misstep. They'd be like, once I put this down, man, he's going to be on me 24/7 about it. But it's in our kind of world now, I think it's become that kind of a structure where when I was at university, I felt a lot of the things I needed to do had to have some sort of empirical backing to it, because that's what at the end of the day, the AD wants. He wants, okay, well, your performance evaluation, he had, 20 graduating seniors, 19 are great, one was bad. That's awesome. This is your percentage. As a coach, I was like, what was the bad one? But really, for the AD, they're just like, we want a 98% approval rating kind of thing. They want those numbers. And so for something like a goal, it was in a sense of like a quantifiable way of going, your goal is just say like a 5-minute 500 freestyle, yet I've never seen you go faster than a 105 in a practice ever. How are you going to pace 00 if you can't even go 105? And so for them, it's like that's getting thrown back. My goals, my dreams getting thrown back in my face. But again, how do we get that earlier on where they understand when you've gotten to this point, it's because you're finding it a pretty critical juncture that they make some changes.
So two things I want to address in that question, because I think really you are asking two questions. The first off goes to the nature of why positive psychology exists in the first place. And then I'm going to ask the more specific question, which is about like what in general you would do, or sort of what the process would be from the outset. So I think a lot of times positive psychology gets rolled in with self-help. And that's because a lot of the concepts that are discussed are, like they sound the same to a lot of people as what you might expect, for instance, from like a Tony Robbins conference, right? But I think the difference with positive psychology is, Tony Robbins essentially is like a performer who I think is amazing at what he does, and can absolutely go out there and coach people and elicit responses from them and stuff. But the foundation of what he's doing is not really scientific whatsoever. Positive psychology was an attempt to say, okay, like there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of existing research that is sort of hasn't been collected under one nomenclature to figure out, what some of this self-improvement stuff is, or the stuff that people are using to create a better life or create better mental well-being, the stuff that you're not trying to fix problems, but actually just get better. And let's actually give that a name, and let's actually like scientifically research and test some of this stuff. So, so that institutionally we can say like, this is not just my opinion, man, right? But this is actually something that people have tried to figure out, like what works and what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And of course that stuff, like I'm the first one to say that stuff has limitations, right? That's, look, that's why we have PhDs and that's why we have MDs. Okay. The PhDs, push the envelope in terms of like what solutions we might come up with in the future. The MDs actually have to practice medicine, mm-hmm. right? And coaches are out there. They actually have to practice coaching. They're not researchers. They're not out in the field. They actually have to do stuff. Okay. So what would I do? Well, this gets to the heart of what the actual course is, because I think the first step for changing sort of some of the stuff within your organization is working on the concept of emotional regulation. And I tell a story about myself in a lot of context when I talk about emotional regulation. And that's actually from my first year of coaching, something I seldom actually talk about in this podcast. It's kind of like in a lot of forums, I just sort of glide over it. But I graduated from college and I worked at an all boys school for a year. And it was kind of a unique situation. We had a pool on campus and I could run swimming year round. So I was really excited about it because even though it was a high school swim team, the kids were there. It was a boarding school and we could swim all through the school year. So it's a little bit unique in that sense. And again, it like was in the middle of nowhere and I had the key to the pool. So like the pool was open whenever I wanted it to. Practice was never whenever I wanted it to. I had a lot of freedom in that respect. And I took it probably because at that point, that was what I thought I could do to satisfy my swim coaching fix. So I still had to teach history, but like I was completely uninterested basically in teaching history. I just wanted to coach swimming, which is why I only did it for 1 year. Because it's not a good idea to be a teacher when your main focus is not teaching. Right. And that really was the job. But we had like one of the weird things, eccentricities of this job is that we had a weird hodgepodge of championships in the year. We went to like some private school championships and then we went to some like local championships. And we had some kind of like local county championships coming up. And just so happened, I had just started dating my now wife, Kate, and she was coming to visit on the weekend of this championship. And I was driving on a Western Pennsylvania highway on my way to meet her in my 1997 red Subaru Legacy. And all of a sudden, like it's like a 2-lane highway, outside of who knows where. It was like an hour plus drive. I just see headlights coming straight for me. And like when you're both probably going like 50 miles an hour, very little time to react to that stuff. So I swerve out of the way at the last moment. Guy collides with me. I did a full 180 into the other side of the road. My driver's side door was like impacted within inches of my body. I walked away totally fine. And the guy, unfortunately, behind me in the car took it head on. It was like one of those police cruiser cars. And the guy was driving like, a Toyota Corolla. And his car just got totally smashed. And we were just in the middle of nowhere. And remember the guy behind me, he had, whatever that fracture of your leg is where like the bone is completely broken. And, his friend was screaming at him, like, you got to help me, like, pick his leg up. The reason I'm telling this whole story it was pretty traumatic experience at the time. And a couple days later, I have to go to this championship meet. And like, I have like really no expectations. I don't know what the heck's going on at this meet. For what's going on, but we are like all the way at some point, like we've made it to must be the second break of a high school meet and we're in first place. Like we're going to win. But I've used up all my best swimmers. So I have nobody left for the 400 freestyle relay. And by the way, my wife is on the pool deck watching this happen. So she can verify this place. And I was like, I melted down. I completely melted down. I could not figure out for the life of me what I was supposed to do, and somehow decided to split the 2 relays that I had when I could have just gone with my 4 best remaining swimmers, and we lost the meet by 2 points. Why did I tell that whole story? um, because what I see over and over again in life, but specifically in sports and with coaches and with athletes, is you have these moments where emotionally you're just overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed emotionally, like, you do not make the best decision. You don't. You don't. And that's why I start with teaching coaches actually, like, what is emotional regulation? Talk actually about what emotions are, how they're formed in the brain, how the thinking, how the cognitive parts of our brain respond to emotional signaling, sorry.
Sure.
And then how you can interrupt various loops that you have, right? Where you get caught, where you get a big emotional response, it leads to certain cognitive thinking on the other end, and then causes you to act in a certain way. And then, that situation just sort of wash, rinse, repeats a lot of times. The cool thing about positive psychology is that it has a lot of really good tools for changing things on the cognitive level.
Okay.
So changing things on the level where you're thinking, and therefore breaking patterns within you. And frankly, I think it's important for coaches to learn how to do that themselves. Everybody wants, like, when I go out there, what they say they want is they want to be able to teach this to athletes. The most important thing for me was working on it within myself. Has never been teaching other people. Like, that is important as well, but the continual, like, internal process of it, extremely, extremely important. And that's why I start with that as a beginning point. And that's where I would start if you're looking at a team and you're caught in these extremely frustrating loops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially like you see coaches all the time where they can kind of see it coming. And that's always been the worst part about being a coach,
Right.
is like, you see the train wrecks coming, and there's not a thing you can do to stop it. You're like, this is going to happen, this will happen, this will happen. And like, trying to figure out the way to, like, get that to not line up is pretty hard. And a lot of what you're saying, it makes total sense in that it's a very scientific thing. And like, the brain is set up, like, basically we're still hunter-gatherers to the brain, especially at the deepest part of the brain. That's just how we are. And so everything that attacks us, whether it's a lion, or in a sense, like, something that's just become like that lion to us, like whether it's like a parent or a swim-meet situation like that, that's going to elicit the same response that the lion does, the same negative hormonal response, the same brain response, and are basically kind of going back to that primitive brain of surviving. Like, what do I do to survive? What do I do to get myself out of this safely? And that's not going to be the diplomatic, did you get 98% on your Scantron of end of the season evals? It's completely different things to quantify it, but it's what you are in that moment. And some coaches are able to compartmentalize, but I think in their ability to compartmentalize, they create that distance a little bit. And I see that a lot now with, like, Division I swim teams, where you're merging programs of 1 and 2 of the men and women and things like that. And the coach becomes more of the CEO, and like, that's not really what we got in is, if you're a good coach, doesn't mean you're a good business manager or a good CEO, but that's what you kind of have to become. And you have to assume that role, and that role becomes you trying to become more detached, because you might have to fire that assistant. You might have to cut that swimmer. You have to figure out the budget. You have to figure out all these other things that are, in a sense, business decisions, and not what you got into the whole coaching for. And so you see sometimes where the coaches become devoid of emotion, in a sense, as a protective mechanism, I think.
Yeah, and I had another thought about something you mentioned there as I was walking around today, walking and thinking, which is something I try to do a couple times a day. Highly recommend to other people as well. You talk about, how, like, the brain is perceiving threat, regardless of, whether the threats are what most of us face on a daily basis. versus, like historically, ancestrally, sort of like real life threatening stuff. An observation that I had that you and I, and a conversation you and I had offline last week, is I was watching the video version of this and editing a bit. And I just said to you, like, I was like, hey, Joel, you look great. Like, what's up? Like, what you been doing? And you and I had a little, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but you and I had a little talk. And I know I've been talking to you too about stuff that I've been working on with myself. And, I had a podcast earlier this week where I talked about my return to swimming. And I said, one of the things I said in there is like, hey, everybody's got a goal for their body. I don't care. Like, you might be listening to this going like, I'm not going to go swim. Okay, that's fine. But you have a goal for your body. Like, you want to be able to do certain things. You want, maybe you want to look a certain way, although that, comes with its own consequences. But I think one of the things that people are dealing with that's really challenging in that respect, and I'm going to bring this all the way back to our minds, is we live in an environment where it's never been easier to eat poorly, right? Like the accessibility of delicious, terrible for you food has never been better, right? So that does create a challenge. I know it creates a massive challenge for me in terms of eating what I want. Well, the mind is not that different from the body. Okay. It's a lot more similar than it is different. Right now, in the era that we're living right now, it has never been easier to do things that are bad for your mental health, right? Like, we literally almost all carry around
Right. Cell phones.
devices
Yeah.
that we know are not good for our mental health,
Yeah.
and we look at them a lot.
Right.
Okay. That's just like one example of something. So, in the same way, like, you may be noticing like, hey, I'm not having a great time doing this, or I'm not enjoying this as much as I do, or, like, rationally on a certain level, I know my life is pretty good, but it doesn't feel like that. Okay. Realize that, changing that is an intentional process, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's what I heard when you were telling me back everything that you were doing. It was like, first I started with this, and like, I was intentional about this for a while, and then I changed this, and then I changed this, and then I changed this. And it was all sort of at a systemic level, of like pulling back versus being reactive. Like, I'm fat, I'll starve myself to it. Right? Like, that doesn't work. It's certainly, some people can get themselves to do it in a short term, but like, being purely reactive to some of this stuff rather than thinking like, okay, how do I actually want to set this up better from the outset, is different. And I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the course is on that level, for the mental side. And if you, as a coach, if you work on that within yourself, well, first off, you're going to be in a better position to make good decisions. Like, you're just going to make more good decisions, right? And like, if you think about, whatever the best decisions you've made, like, wouldn't you like to have more of those? I think everybody would agree with the statement like that. But you're also going to be leading by example. The way that you are is going to have an influence. Like, it, I think so many coaches, if we go all the way back to your very, very specific example, they're looking at that kid who's responding defensively or scared or feeling threatened, and they haven't considered all the ways in which they feel very threatened and are responding defensively, and are I think there's no better lack for it, but I want to find a way to help coaches have more respect for themselves. Because so often a lot of this stuff, they go like, well, let me like get something for the swimmers, get something, do something for yourself, man. Like, you are, like you said, you're somebody that's hopefully going to be with this team for 20 years. The kids are going to come and go. Like you will be here for generations of people. And so everything that you invest in yourself, that pays huge dividends to everybody that you end up coaching down the line. And I've seen a lot of people who don't end up making that investment in themselves until they step away from coaching. And I want to find a way to get people to do it while they're still in the game.
Yeah, I think just kind of try to maybe summarize kind of what you're saying. Like it's kind of that analogy of the boiling frogs, where if you just put frogs in water and you don't have them to jump out, you keep turning the heat up, heat up, heat up. Eventually they'll boil themselves alive. Versus if they hit the hot water, like they're getting out right away. The same thing with the coaches.
Yeah.
I think we kind of set ourselves into that role of servitude of like we have to for the team we need these kids to do X, Y, and Z. We need to do this, and so I'm going to live by this example. And it's the same thing as like what you were saying of as far as like setting up like these base things to make ourselves healthier. We set up base levels each step of the way, making us unhealthy in a sense of like you gave up a little extra time doing this. You got in that car accident and probably the first thing you're like, I got to get to that meet. What do you mean help that guy with the leg? I've got to get to a meet. I've got a swim meet. Kids are going to be swimming soon. And I'm supposed to help with the, you're like.
Well, I mean, I was worried. I was like, Kate's at the airport. Who's going to get her now?
Exactly.
Like,
and it's like,
I almost died.
It's literally almost death versus this. Yeah. And that's the thing is
yeah.
And so when you step back and you look at that, you're like, well, that's ridiculous. But in the moment, again, you've set all these little steps along the way to put yourself in a position in coaching where you're not going to be, all right, I'll come in. Someone's going to come in for an extra practice. I'll be there for that kid. Someone might be there 15 minutes early. I'm going to be there 30 minutes early. I'm going to stay 15 minutes late. I'm going to push against these other things like, well, so many times like, I don't need to eat lunch. I got to finish this work. And then I don't really need to do this. Working out, that's backburn. All the things for yourself. For me, from a personal standpoint, I would always go, the things I would do for myself, I'd be like, that's not as important as the stuff that I'm doing for the team. Therefore, I need to step back away from that. And that became my time reservoir. And I'll just make it up later, much like you're saying, I'm 40 pounds overweight. I'm going to lose it all tomorrow. It's like I set myself up by the end of the week where like, now I'm so far behind. What am I going to do in one day to fix that? So I'm already immersed in this. And so we set ourselves up with these incremental bad habits and those incremental good habits, whether it's for the team emotionally or incremental for ourselves, are far more important. Again, like if you're talking about losing weight, the best thing is, you don't have 100 calories worth of snacks every day. And it's going to take a long time to lose 20 pounds, but that's really all it is you set up that discipline, because the emotion for the stuff is not going to always be there. The emotion of, I'm going to do everything right now, that fades. That love of getting up for the 5 a.m. swim practice. First week, you're like, this is great. Good to have the kids back. It fades. And so eventually that discipline of doing the things needs to take over. But we want to make sure that we set up healthy boundaries, healthy steps towards that. So again, we are giving as much as we can, but understanding that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We've got a career to think about. We've got a family to think about. We've got a lot more kids than like one kid making possibly Olympic trials versus 100 kids on the team kind of thing.
Well, I see, and I even like I'm hearing a few triggered coaches in what you just said, because I think some people are going to listen to it.
Oh yeah, it sounds very selfish.
They're going to go, Chris and Joel, like, yeah, Chris, I'll sign up for your course so you can tell me to stop working so hard.
Right.
And no, that's actually not what I'm saying. That's actually not what I'm going to help you to do, because I, for so long, believed I would have the same response. I'd go like, yeah, okay, I know I should do X, Y, and Z, but like, I got to do this. I have to do this. And what I'm realizing finally is that by actually being disciplined about working on myself, I actually have more to give.
Right.
So like the process of giving more to the people around me, which is what I like, that's at the core of most coaches. They want to be giving. They want to give of themselves to the world. Well, like somebody's got to build you back up, and the only person that can do it is you, right? And so when you actually have a process for building yourself up, then yeah, you have even more to give, and it's not like you're constantly, at the end of the day, like, oh, like that's it, that's all I got, like.
No, and I think even more basic of an analogy, because like what I was saying there is like, again, when we're talking, you understand where I'm coming from, and I never think that anyone might actually listen to this. It is again the idea that that does sound selfish, but from my standpoint, it's the standpoint of like the more basic, like most coaches start out as lifeguards. You can't save someone if you're exhausted. I remember one of your favorite assistant coaches was on my swim team, and he was out in the surf way too far, way over his head, getting slammed by waves. And the lifeguards were on the beach because this is like, 50-degree California water during the wintertime. The lifeguards like, I know your kids can swim all right. However, those are some bigger kids. I'd rather help a distressed swimmer than have to go make a save. So if those guys need to throw their hand up and say they need help, that's not being less of a man. That's just helping me out a lot. And like that thing that he said, like makes a lot of sense in every aspect of your life. It's like, it's a lot easier to be like, you know what, I need to set some boundaries and do that early so that I have enough energy to be able to, get back to shore, or in this case, to make that save. If you want to help someone else on your team, again, the whole, what our podcast started was the idea that you're sitting there, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're emotionally spent, and you say one thing that in your head doesn't sound bad. The one thing is like, you're not living up to your goals. I think we can do better. And in their head, whatever day they had, they brought in their emotional baggage, and they just heard, Chris hates me. And he was like, I didn't say I hated you.
Chris yelled at me
Chris
today.
Doesn't believe in me. He hates me. He yelled at me.
Yeah.
And that's what he heard. And again, we've talked about this in our previous podcast, that there's a possibility of many different realities. That reality in your head is true. You believe in them, just they're not living up to their end of the goals right now, and we got to adjust that. Because I believe in you that you can adjust those goals. Otherwise, I would have said those goals were ridiculous. And his reality is, Chris doesn't believe me. So again, it's like, you can't say the kid's a liar. That's how he interpreted what you said. And so that's what we have to address, is that what we say isn't always what's in our head, and especially when we're tired, it's going to come out wrong. It's going to have a tone to it that we didn't mean to have. You're reading an email when you're exhausted, and my tone is always like, I can't believe they're grinding on me about this.
Right.
And it was like, how are you feeling today? What do you mean by that, you sarcastic? You're like, again, it's one of those things, we take so much into an email, we do the same thing into a conversation. We think that there's a look, we think there's a tone, but that's kind of what we put into it. And so I guess it's a long way of saying is again, that a rest isn't just being lazy. That rest is creating a rest where you're able to kind of take a step back and go, you know what, I don't think they meant this. Why don't I ask for clarification? Which takes a lot of energy to do when you're tired. Like, can you clarify what you just said?
Yeah. Well, and even in the example that you're citing here, like, okay, I would love to live it. Like, I think that most coaches, if they, for instance, were coaching like 10 people versus 30 people at a time, they could say something, they could make a mistake in what they say a lot more often, because their relationships would be better, and they would have time afterwards to go like, oh, hey, I saw you were pretty upset when I said that. Like, what's going on? Like they know how to do the relationships. Unfortunately, most of us are not operating in situations where we have all day to like build relationships and do all sorts of stuff. Like, I would love to live in that world, but like, let's find a way to structurally build something where you're less likely to find yourself in that situation, because that's like, we can work on both at the same time is really, if you heard on this podcast, we're advocating for both.
We're allowed to have your personality when you coach.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this, like, I think I was watching one of those things with Ricky Gervais, and he was talking about, I'd rather have like a joke that like 10 people in the audience really laugh hard at than a joke where 1,000 people kind of chuckle at. And it's like, in a sense, that's kind of like what coaching has become, is like, you can't say something really hard driving, like, we need to get you to the Olympic trials, you're not living up to your goals, because now now you got 900 people not laughing or 900 people not getting that message. And sure, one or two
Right.
are getting that message, and that's great, and they're going to do great things. But now you alienated the other group, and you want your emotion to come out. You want your fire to come out a little bit in the sport. However, far too often we've heard coaches use that saying, I'm just emotional about the sport. I'm just fired up about the sport. And that's their cover for being an asshole,
Well, no, but I say hold on to it. I'm going to help you hold on to it.
Right.
And like,
but it needs
and
to be channeled a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, if you take this course, I will help you continue to push people as hard as you want to push them, but feel better about the fact that you are a positive force and that you are coaching in a positive direction, that you are building people's belief in themselves, that you're building them up, that you are aware of what's going on, that you're empathetic. Like, you can be confident in all those things and push people really, really hard, right? You don't have to actually sacrifice that value on the path to doing that. And I think that's, again, if I go back to the beginning, some of the toxic messaging that I see around that, where coaches get, like, you be more positive, and implicit in that is stop pushing people so hard, like, which just like grates against the values of coaches. They know that their high expectations are actually a key part of why they're successful.
Right.
If they came in and just go like, everybody just do some hundreds on whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they know that doesn't actually help people to get faster. So, all right. I think we're going to cap it at there for today. Joel, thank you so much as always. Thank you to everybody for listening. If you want to follow for more positive psychology, quick bite content, you can go to Instagram.com, ChrisD_coach, CD Swim Coach on Facebook. If you go to Chris D Coach and click on Positive Psych Education tab on the top, you can sign up for the course. Still spots available for that, and I'd love to have you, especially if you listened here and feel like this is for you. And thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to Pro Swim Workouts for sponsoring this podcast, and I'll see you guys all next week.
Great. Thank you.